So it took me a while to figure out something to talk about. Very important thing. Finally did occur to me. I was like, oh, you know what? This is actually a really good one. Um, and when I was young, spoke English, and then when I was young, I would talk to people, and I don't really feel like I talked about anything that was like with everybody I hung out with, my friends, so to speak, when I was in various levels of school. I feel like I was either unable to detect this phenomenon, or I just didn't experience it because the things that I talked about were simple enough that they could be conveyed and understood reasonably well. I think I was rather articulate when I was, younger. But I believe going to Italy and learning Italian, it affected my articulate speech. It affected my ability to communicate. Why would that happen? Well, you're speaking to people that don't understand what you're fucking saying. Right? So what does that mean? Well, you do a lot of pointing. You have a limited vocabulary because you don't actually speak the language. The grammar is different, although I knew Spanish pretty well when I was in high school. Like I could actually speak it, we'll say, at the level of a 4-year-old, which is that's pretty good actually, but limiting for sure, And that was after a while, right? But anyway, even building up to that, definitely there was a lot of pointing. Sometimes the way you would phrase them, because if you wanted to say something complicated, right, you might have to get there in a really roundabout way. So it actually changed the way you approached speaking, such that you would speak simplistically and all kinds of things, and the way you word something might be worded with the words you know, which mean that you had to get there in a really roundabout way. And pointing and body language and facial expressions and all kinds of other sort of nonsense, were heavily leaned upon to convey meaning. Sometimes I wonder if this process, the process of staring at somebody truly when you talk to them, like me and my friends, we might just walk next to each other and we might be talking, we might glance over at each other every once in a while, we might look at each other every once in a while when we're talking, but for the most part, don't get me wrong, we really did look at each other, but I'm just saying, maybe the looking wasn't so intense because we're both speaking English. It's very easy to communicate. It's very easy to understand what is happening and what they're saying and what meaning they're trying to convey. But in Italy, I might have to really stare at somebody to try to make, are you really picking up what I'm laying down? Do you really understand me? What are you walking away thinking that I'd said? I know one of the silliest but awesome things that I did when I was in Italy was you learn all these little. So I'm kind of like a weirdo in the sense that I think about people's mental states and how you can play with that in such a way that you can figure things out. I remember one of the coolest things that I liked to do is I would like to walk up to girls And I would be like, tu hai un bel face. Because you point at your face, and you're basically pretending that you don't know that the word in Italian is face. Right? But, face is like this thing. It's like this word that means something else to Neapolitans. So they would either laugh. It means like groin area, okay, for a chick. They would either laugh or they would smile coyly. Right. Anyway, their response was worth a million words. I could see where things were going based on. I could see I could tell a lot of things just based on their response. Is the point. So that was really useful. And if things worked out badly, you always had plausible deniability because you'd pointed at your face, and a lot of times they know certain words. They spoke enough English, probably sometimes that they would pick that up. They'd know this is. So funny little thing that if they were offended, you could always have your plausible deniability. Anyway, yeah, whatever. Dad was a little bit of a player, I guess. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway. When I was in Italy, I remember professionally I'd be walking. I was in the Navy, obviously. I'd be walking around, and we had a bunch of contractors on the base, and they'd be, doing stuff alongside us, I guess, because they had some IT personnel, I guess, and then they had some just workers that would just be building stuff or something, right? And I know there was definitely a thing where it's like at some point somebody would speak to me in Italian. I'd respond to them in Italian. I wouldn't even realize it. This was after I'd gotten comfortable with the language. And so then 5 seconds later, somebody would speak to me in English, and I'd respond to them in English. In other words, what language I was using was irrelevant to my mind, and I wasn't even really paying attention to which language I was speaking and when. If you asked me a question or approached me and said something like, all right, now I want you to think about the mindset that entails. There comes a point where your brain lies to itself and just says, well, it doesn't matter. When people say things, I just generally understand 100% of the time. I know how to speak this other language, so I know how to speak all languages. And by the way, I'm not saying that was like a purposeful thing. It's like a muscle response kind of thing. Your brain, just under the hood, just starts to assume that it knows what language is being spoken, and that it's supposed to understand because, well, it's mastered this other thing, and so you're just not used to hearing things that you don't understand anymore. Right? So, what does that look like? Well, I know one of my friends, by the way, when I learned Italian, I overrode my Spanish. I lost. You ask me what this word is in Spanish, I might still be able to tell you, but I might tell you the Italian word because I get them intermixed. And I just seem to be unable to speak. Like, I'm not able to use Spanish anymore. At all. Not even at a 4-year-old level. My brain was unable to handle Spanish and Italian at the same time. And what's funny is, I would tell people that, I used to actually speak Spanish because I took Spanish in high school. My dad actually was a Spanish teacher. he wasn't Hispanic, but he lived in El Paso for a really long time, and so he'd picked up the language, and I was like, yeah, I used to speak Spanish fairly well. Now I don't. Isn't that interesting? And then they would be like, I don't believe you. That's not possible. And there was one time we were sitting in Kearney Park, which is it's the center of basically a dead volcano. There was somebody built like a golf course and some other stuff. I think it's closed down now and turned over to the Italian Nationals or whatever. But anyway, we're talking about stuff on the probably the 4th of July or something like that. And anyway, they're like, they start testing me on it. So Josh is speaking Spanish. He throws some Spanish in there. Like, so there's somebody saying, my wife is speaking to me Italian. They're coming at me with Spanish and English. And it's like too many languages and my brain just shuts down. Like, I literally kind of go, blah, blah, and it's extremely uncomfortable. I actually got a headache. Yeah. I actually ended up getting like a headache. It sucked. And anyway, where I was really going with this is that when I came back from Italy, I think I had trained myself to speak differently. There's a part of me that wonders if like this awakening, we'll call it, that I had with my cognitive ability might have been caused by this, right? And I say that because when I came back, I felt like I had a really hard time. Like when I communicated with people, the ability to pass information. Like, okay, so like I know Michelle, if you ever watch this, I get on to you about like making up words. It's something young people do on a regular basis. Like, that's the shiznit, or balls, or at some point cool, or chill, chillax. All these terms, they're derivative, and they come about, and sometimes they work their way into the language in a permanent way. Well, heck, the word gay used to mean like happy, and now it means something utterly different. And that's because somebody, people started using that as a euphemism for, homosexuality or whatever. And then anyway, the language distorts over time. And that reason that annoys me is because humans actually have this is the crux of the video. This is TLDR part right here. I should have got to this like 13 minutes ago, apparently. But TLDR. Humans have a really hard time actually communicating with each other. There. That's the issue. We spend a lot of freaking time talking past each other. You'll say something, and I think I understand, but I didn't understand. I'll say something to you, and I'll think you understand, and you'll tell me flat, yes, I understand, but you didn't understand. We have a hard time with that. And all this other stuff about inventing words and all this other stuff just makes that harder. Because rather than learning the language you have available to you, you're busy like trying to be creative and do some stuff, which I appreciate. And I guess, yeah, sure, it is part of just growing up. And I'm sure, yes, people are going to say some stupid shit like, languages naturally evolve and stuff. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Well, no. There is. Now, I'm not what you call language police. I do make up words myself. Like, but I do it in a way that's like, I am trying to communicate effectively. Because that's really what's important to me. Effective communication. Where whatever is in here is in there when I'm done talking. Um, so when I make up words, it's because there's some tense that I've never used, or some modification to a word that I've never heard before, but I'm like, it needs to be like I'm trying to say something and it ends up being like, I can't think of an example because they always happen kind of, I'm always like searching for a word, and then I'll say like, it's like this word, but I need it in this tense. So I'm just going to do it. Even though I've never heard it before and it's probably not a thing, right? Like, the term modality. Where did that come from? You know? Where did the term modality come from? Or applicability, right? These are real words, obviously. But, you know, at some point, it probably wasn't like a real word, and then somebody turned it into that word because they were just following grammar rules as they understood them and that were commonly understood by other people, and they put extra things at the end of another word, application, or apply, right? And then this other word came into being, and then sometimes they catch on, sometimes they don't, whatever. And I find myself sometimes conjugating some kind of word in such a way that I'm applying some tense that I'm not certain is a word, but I'm going to use it, and then I'm going to stare at everybody and make sure that they're shaking their head, and they're gonna look up, and they're going to be like, I know what he's trying to say. And then I'm like, yep, okay, that's all I care about. So I do that sometimes. People talk past each other all the time. And a lot of times you see, in modern times, you see people redefining what words mean. Like the word gay going from just happy to the other thing, which, you know, there's other words for happy. I mean, or there's other words for gay, I should say. You could say elated, or elation, the act of being experiencing elation. Had a gay old time. You know, I don't know. It is kind of sad that some words end up doing that. I mean, there's other words that can be used to express the idea, though. So maybe that's fine. And maybe there's a gap. I mean, homosexual, that's a big, long word, right? So saying somebody's homosexual, you know, that's a lot of syllables. Maybe we do need a shorthand way of saying that's easier to say or something or whatever, and they happen to choose that one. Actually, I'm not even sure they choose it. If you really think about it, it might have even been a straight person that started saying like, you know, they had a gay old time or something, and then they just kind of owned it or something. You know, I'd imagine that's probably the more likely scenario. Might even been bullying or something at some point, and then they they were like, well, if you're gonna use that word against us as a derogatory thing, that's fine. We're gonna take it, own it, and make it our own stuff. That's a strategy people use all the time, and it's I get it. You know, like, I'm not hating. You do what you do to defend against bullies or whatever, you know, whatever. So, yeah. The point is, people talk past each other a lot, and it's something you got to be cognizant of. And I sometimes wonder if my realization of this thought, right, is kind of what led me. Because when you start talking to people and you start having different motives, like a lot of people, when they're talking with people, they have different motivations for like going back to my story about the Tu hay un bel face. There was a motivation behind that, and hopefully I don't have to articulate what that is, because you can kind of see I'm using it as a psychological tool to try to gauge somebody's response. and kind of get some hints as to, like, what are my chances here? You know what I'm saying? That's a motivation under that, right? It's flirting, so to speak. You're flirting. And sometimes people talk and they kind of they want to argue. Sometimes people talk and they want a discussion. Sometimes people talk and they're just trying to learn stuff. And a lot of times that's going to turn into a discussion. There's transactional analysis is something that is something you can look into. It's got a bunch of little talks about adult, child, parent interactions, and those are terms that are placeholders for other things and stuff. And I think they're pretty good placeholders because they pretty much describe the mental states and stuff. And it talks about how sometimes parent can be positive, sometimes it can be negative, sometimes child can be positive, sometimes child can be negative. But the adult state is, generally speaking, where you want to try to be most of the time, probably, you know. And how sometimes you can get into a discussion with somebody and your states will be flopping between the parent, the adult, and the child, right? I feel like that stuff is, like, super useful to know. Some people are talking to the point that they want to win. Some people they want to feel powerful, or some people want to feel this. Some people want to feel that. So there's always some kind of underlying motivation to why somebody's communicating with you. And knowing what that is super useful, actually, if you can determine it. Sometimes it's hard to determine, and sometimes you got to leave the door open a little bit because it could, like, all right, well, it's definitely one of these, but I don't know exactly which one, so let's keep going, figure out if this is going to be a discussion worth having, or a conversation worth having, because if it's this one, then maybe that's fine, but if it's this, I'm not interested, because you're retarded. And then, here's another thing, is some people can't actually tell the difference between, like, a discussion or an argument. My sister, for instance, she really just does not get, like, if you say something and then I ask you questions, it doesn't mean that I'm challenging your authority. It doesn't mean, I might be challenging your fact, maybe, but that's definitely not, like, a given. It actually might be that I want to get clarification on what exactly you mean by that, because I'm very aware of how easy it is to miscommunicate with buzzwords and all kinds of other retarded stuff. People invent buzzwords. Some people are actually purposely trying to deceive you, like in programming, cloud computing. Man, there was a long time that was just that was a buzzword that just meant anything and everything. Nobody actually, very few people actually. It was ineffective to use that word in any way because people misused it everywhere. People had various understandings of it, and so therefore using that word it increased the likelihood that you would misconvey your meaning, or you would misinterpret their meaning by, like, I'm going to make up a number. It's completely made up, fabricated. Tenfold. Right? Very likely that nobody understood each other if you used that word. Another one was service-oriented programming. Like, what does that even freaking mean? What is a service? What is this? What is that? Right? Defining those terms, like, those words are extraordinarily nebulous in the programming world for anybody that might want to be a programmer that listens to this or whatever. Anytime people are using those words, you probably want to get some clarification. If they use more specific words like web service or Windows service or something like that, that's fine. If they say services, they're talking about probably a collection of various things that can do things and stuff, or provide some functionality or whatever. But like, if you just say that's a service over here, you're like, all right, what does that even mean? Is this all, like, because service could be even like you have a service like inside of one project, one deployable, one exe file. You might have a concept called service where it's like, I have models, I have services, services are things that do things. Models are just DTOs and stuff. But well, that's kind of contrary to that's not a web service. That's just like a class file that has a specific role inside this one application space. So sometimes these terms are problematic. You'll end up talking past somebody, and you don't even realize it, and they don't even realize it. So yeah, that's like totally a thing. And some people are doing it on purpose. Like I guarantee the reason service-oriented architecture and cloud computing became like so nebulous was actually it had a crap ton to do, I bet, with marketing. That's my guess. People were trying to market this crap, and they were like, during the marketing frenzy, they lost control of the word, and they probably didn't. Maybe they didn't even have the definition really hammered out. My VDI is not responding. This is unfortunate. So yeah, it's like a thing that people do, and it's very problematic. And I do think there's a large degree that most people don't recognize at all when this is happening, and they don't think it's as big a problem as it is. Like, they don't realize the scope of the problem. It happens far more often than most people realize. Like, and then it happens. And most of the time it doesn't matter too much, but it happens far more than people realize. And the problem is far more. It causes, like, it's one of the reasons I think. Okay, so right now, the country's falling apart. It is. I mean, it already fell apart. But we're kind of running on fumes. I think. Like, we're on our way out. Like, as far as we're in decline. The nation is in decline. Just period. Right. And I don't think there's any stopping this train. Right. And how did this start? It started because people invented words. They either invented words or they redefined words. They would co-opt language. Like, okay, for transactional analysis. Transactional analysis is that psychological conversation evaluation tool, basically, that says, okay, well, here's like a gimmick, and then there's 3 mental states that people can be in when they're having conversations, or actually more like 12, I think, because there's an authoritative parent role, or there's the consoling parent role, and that you can break it down even further and stuff. So anyway, there's this tool, right? But it uses these terms. It uses parent, adult, and child as descriptors of these things. So I feel like anytime you're using those words, you're like, when I say parent right now, I'm speaking in relation to transactional analysis, right? Which I think I've done in this video. I think I was like, oh, well, here's a concept called transaction analysis where it defines parent, child, and adult, right? Blah, 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 right? But those words actually have other meanings in other places, and if I just start throwing out well, he was in the adult role or something like that for this thing, or and I'm at work or something, or telling somebody, and because I'm just talking about how they were conversing and what, I'm trying to tell them what roles, but I don't actually announce that, I'm switching into transactional analysis mode right now, and I'm using terminology borrowed from that. I'm using the terms as defined by that domain of knowledge, or domain of understanding, or whatever you want to call that, right? People are not going to know what the hell I'm talking about. So some people, they started defining racism as race as prejudice plus power, or some crap like that, which is completely like a nonsensical definition of racism, right? When you use it to apply to people or whatever like that. If you want to talk about a racist system or something, that's prejudice plus power, sure. Relative to what, though? Like what other systems? Because some systems, like if your system is like getting together on a Sunday with like only black people or only white people or whatever, because you're going to watch the football game and you got like your friends all just happen to be black or white or whatever, then that's a system. Is it a prejudice system? Well, it's complicated because why are your friends all one color or one other? Is it because it's in this geographical area? Well, then you're affected by maybe an overarching system and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I don't want to get into all that crap. But it's still a nuanced thing, and you can still have that discussion. But anyway, the thing is a bunch of idiots hear that crap. They don't realize that, like, you can't use those terms. But then and then some charlatans, some people that are purposefully... they like misleading people. They see how it gains them power, and they feel like maybe they're justified in doing so for various reasons and blah blah blah. Anyway, make a long story short, these phrases, they seep into society. So now when two people are talking to each other, they might be talking about racism, and they might be like, that's not racist, and the other person says that's racist, and the reason people are doing that is because the person saying it's not racist is because they're using this prejudice plus power definition, and the other person is just saying like, no, it's like showing preference for some like arbitrary characteristic about a person, like their skin color is different or some shit, and you're showing preferential treatment to one side or the other, or you feel superior to the person or whatever. Because of that trait, not because of some other characteristic that's more important, like character. Right? And so they're talking past each other because they're using this word racism, but one of them's using it in a way that's like, anyway, it's a thing. So that's how this thing started. People started. There was some. I don't know what motivated them, but people started using some stupid words to mean some shit. Some of it was like. Anyway, it's a thing. And now it's gotten out of hand. And now it's literally that, like, you got two groups, you got two factions, so to speak. You got the middle people, too, that aren't trying to be in the middle of it. Those people just don't know what's going on. They don't understand the full scope of the problem. You got two factions now, and they're basically, they can't talk to each other even if they wanted to. So it's impossible to simmer down. That's where we're at. That's why language is fucking important. And that's why making sure you're not talking past people, moment to moment to moment, every day, every time you ever talk to somebody, it's extremely important that you always, 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 always are certain